So the Torah tells us about the prohibition of Tumas Kohanim, the prohibition for a Kohen to come in contact with a corpse. In fact, not only come in contact, perhaps even being in the same room. As the Shulchan Aruch brings down, that a Kohen should stay away, certainly from a Jewish cemetery, that's a given, but perhaps even a non-Jewish cemetery, because that's a machlokes in the Gemara, in the Rishonim, the Rambam, and the Bali Tosas, whether a Kohen could be in the same room as a non-Jewish corpse, what it's called Tumas Ohel. Everyone agrees you can't touch the corpse, but could you be in the same room? So that's a discussion in the Gemara and the Rishonim. It's a major question in terms of many areas. Number one is, can you go into a non-Jewish cemetery? The Shulchan Aruch says no, but the question is, why not? So some say we see from the fact that Shulchan Aruch says no, that means it applies to Gentiles. Others say, unfortunately, that's not the case. Unfortunately, we know there are many Yidden buried in Jewish cemeteries, and therefore maybe that's why the Shulchan Aruch said it was no good. And also regarding the question, which is a whole question in its own right, Kohanim going to medical school. Is it even... So some say there's nothing to talk about. In fact, someone, Rav Hershel Schachter, one of the rabbis at Yeshiva University, so he goes around, he speaks in different yeshivas in Israel. I mean, YU sends them around. So he had a Q&A session. So one of the kids asked, he said, you know what? I'm a Kohen, and I want to become a doctor. Could you tell me things? What do I have to know when I go to medical school? He says, there's only one thing you have to know, that you can't go to medical school. The kid was not too happy. Okay, so, and many say there's nothing to talk about, but within those who say there is something to talk about, it only gets off the ground if you assume that you could be in the same room as a non-Jewish corpse. And in Israel it's a bigger problem unless they're using Arabs or something else. But assuming they're using non-Jewish bodies, so then we could discuss the question. In fact, people say Rav Moshe Tenler, the son-in-law of Rav Moshe Feinstein, people say he gives a heter. He was lenient in going to medical school, which number one is Rav Moshe Feinstein was very against. He said, some people say it's based on pikuach nefesh, saving lives, but he says we never permit something now, because to 5 years from now you might be in a position to save lives. In fact, he even discusses, even if there were no doctors, whether you could do it now for later, but he doesn't buy the argument. It's one of his few responsive, it's very strong language, that it doesn't make any sense. You can't permit something now based on pikuach nefesh, which is not going to happen until another 10 years from now or 5 years from now. The Rav Moshe Tenler, people say, is, he says you could go to medical school. So I spoke to a friend of mine who said, so he wanted to find out what does he actually really say. So he spoke to someone, and he said he knew he asked Rav Tenler. So he said, so tell me what happened. So one guy said, I called up Rav Tenler. I said, my name is Yaakov Shlomo. I'm a Kohen. I'm planning on going to medical school. So Rav Moshe Tenler said, okay, and he hung up the phone. In other words, like, he doesn't give no blanket heter so basically what his shita is, that it's not, that everyone would agree to this. He basically says, if you could make up a hypothetical where you never have to touch the dead bodies. In other words, if you have your lab partner if you could work out an arrangement where physically speaking, you never have to touch the body, then you could go. It's not a matter, it's just a reality. In fact, who knows, maybe whether we're 5 years away or 50 years away from virtual medical school, who knows? But I think right now, they still believe in a hands-on approach. There's nothing like learning in real life than just over the computer. Yeah. But there's no blanket heter. He just says, if that's the way it works, that's the way it works. So he points out that in fact someone, I asked someone else who's a Kohen who's a doctor now, he's been a doctor. So I just asked him, I was just curious, did you like speak to someone about going, or, it's a sensitive question. I don't know if the person thinks like I'm saying he can't, it's his own sensitivity. Now I'm just asking him a question. So actually I wasn't going to ask him, but someone else next to me asked him. So that was even better. So he said, yeah, actually, he said, I sent a couple of, this was like 50 years ago, whatever it was, maybe 40 years ago. He wrote to a couple of Gedolim about it. He said, there's only one who got back to me. That was the Sri Deyesh, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg. And he wrote, he says, if basically, similar to Rav Tengler, basically says, if you don't touch the body, if you use like a stick, or he even said more like using a stick or a twig, but basically the bottom line is, if you whatever he was saying, yeah. I heard someone talked about wearing gloves and stuff, whether that really helps, but the bottom line is that there's a prohibition for a Kohen to come in contact with the dead, so that's not changing. The question is, in terms of Kohanim in medical school, the question is whether you could going to Rav Moshe Tendler and Rav Yaakov Weinberg, everyone would agree to this. If you can make a hypothetical where you don't come in contact with the dead, then there's no blanket thing about Kohanim in medical school. There's an interesting tshuva from Rav Shlomo Goren. He says he has a very big chiddush. He writes that how he permitted it based on the following. There's a halacha in the Gemara. First of all, a dead body is considered a avi avos. The highest level of tuma is a dead body. That's why, in fact, there's a custom. There's a separate question on what about a wife of a Kohen, whether she could go, a pregnant wife of a Kohen, whether she could go to a cemetery. That's one issue. But even a wife of a Levi, a wife of Yisrael, the minig Yisrael is pregnant women, if possible, avoid the cemetery, because the cemetery is the highest level of tomb of death, and a pregnant woman is the highest level of life. You have two lives in there, so that's the minig anyway. So the question is, what about Bisman Hazeh? We don't have the Parad Duma anymore, as we read about, and therefore you can't become pure. So once you come in contact with the dead, so then you're tummy for the rest of your life. So the question is there an additional prohibition for me to come in contact with the dead again? And the first time I'm prohibited, but once it's already happened, and that's why everyone comes in contact in some way, being in a room, or so that's a famous machlokas, the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam writes, each time you come in contact with a mace, you violated an additional biblical prohibition. And I think you get makis each time, so the Rambam is clear. The fact that we're tummy today doesn't change anything. The Isser isn't just becoming tummy, the Isser is coming in contact with the dead. And the Ravid disagrees and says, what's the difference? Bisman Hazeh, we're all tummy mace. So again, it's not clear what he says, but he says something which could be interpreted as perhaps he's saying it's okay, that since a Kohen is tummy mace anyway, so once tummy, always tummy, there's no problem to go ahead and to come in contact. So that's the machlokas Rambam, right? But we pass in like the Rambam, that this is an additional prohibition. And in addition, the Rambam writes, however, when is it okay? If let's say right now you're touching the corpse. So while you're touching the corpse, you can touch 6 corpses. As long as you're still in the same process of touching, there's no separate prohibition. Yeah. But once you leave the scene of the crime or wherever, and then you redo it, that's a violation. So even the Rambam agrees, Tuma b'chiburim, when you're connected to the Tuma, there's no additional. So comes along with Shlomo Goren and says, I have an eitzah for a Kohen. What you do is, there's a halacha in the Gemara of Charav Harehu Kucholo, that a sword has the status of a dead body. In other words, if a metal sword touches a dead body, the sword has the same status as a dead body. It's a special halacha. So therefore, and yet, okay, that wouldn't help us, except the Ramah Paskins and Shulchan Aruch, that a Kohen is allowed to come in contact with this. So it's a special halacha. A Kohen is allowed to come in contact with this sword, even because then else it will be impossible for a Kohen to do things. The bottom line is, when the Kohen is permitted to touch the sword, even though the sword came in contact with the dead. So comes along of Shlomo Garin and says, I have an idea. You take your ring, you give it to your Levi or Yisrael friend who is going to the cemetery. Let him go to the cemetery, bring it back, put it on your finger, and then as the Rambam says, you're in a constant state of Tumas. So the Rambam Shita is that as long as you're Tameh, so you could be Tameh 100 times. So that was his famous tshuva.
Depending on who you hold by.
Exactly. Many people didn't like it because they felt the prohibition isn't just becoming tamei. There's a special prohibition of kiruv l'meis, coming closer. As long as you, so therefore it's true that the halacha of chara ha'ikokala works, but by you going to medical school, you are putting yourself in this. That you can't do. That's what obviously Shlomo Goren says you can do, but others who disagree say, Rav Herschel Shechta among many, and therefore, but he says the Isser is coming in proximity. Whether you become tummy or not isn't the issue. Like we pointed out today, like you're already tummy anyway. So if the issue was only Tumas Meisim, so then that would be like the Ravid. Right. And yeah, we passing like the Rambam, and then they point out, and therefore he says that's why the more leniency is by Kohanim on airplanes. I don't mean an airplane with a dead body in the plane. That's a separate issue. But I mean flying over cemeteries, which just about, notice every airport's like surrounded by cemeteries. Because the issue is, because the halacha is that Tuma goes all the way to the Rakia. The halacha is that the cemetery goes all the way. So therefore, one of the Hatei Ramar, that since you're not coming closer, you're going further away, so there's more room for leniency. So to summarize, we were discussing the prohibition of Tumas Kohanim, the biblical prohibition of Tumas Kohanim, and the challenges of a Kohen if the Kohen attempts to go to a medical school. And that's what, as Rav Soloveitchik said, that basically that's all we have left. All we have left today for Kohanim is not coming in contact with the dead. He was very reluctant in permitting it. He thought he was against it because we're going to lose the status of once Kohanim start coming in contact with the dead. What else do you have left? And therefore, he was also, him and Rav Moshe and others, are very against Kohanim going to medical school. The Torah tells us that there is a biblical prohibition for a Kohen to come in contact with the dead. It's known as Tumas Meisim. And this prohibition of a Kohen coming in contact with the dead, that is limited to male Kohanim, men. However, the wife of a Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen, is permitted to go to a cemetery to come in contact with the dead. How do we know that? Because the Gemara makes a drasha when the Torah tells us to tell them to B'nai Aaron. So the Gemara makes a drasha. Chazal tell us B'nai Aaron, the sons of Aaron, below B'nos Aaron, but not the daughters of Aaron. So we learn out that this whole prohibition only applies to men and not to women. So which leads the poskim, and it's brought down in different tshuvas. What about the following question? A wife of a Kohen is pregnant. Is she permitted to go into a cemetery? We just finished saying, well, it doesn't apply to women, so why should she have to worry? Because perhaps she has a male fetus inside, and therefore she's prohibited to enter a cemetery because she might be carrying a male fetus. So do we have to be concerned about that? So the first one to discuss it was the Rokeach. And the Rokeach teaches us the following. We know, this is the Gemara in the Rokeach, The Gemara tells us in many places, Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra, a doubt regarding a biblical obligation we're strict on. Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, a doubt regarding a rabbinic obligation we are lenient. And a Svek Sveka, double doubt, even on a biblical obligation, one is lenient. So the Rakeach says, we can marshal here a Svek Sveka. We can marshal here a double doubt. Why? Because one doubt is maybe it's a male, maybe it's a female. And even if you're going to tell me it's a male, maybe it will be a nafil, it won't be a viable vlad, a viable child, it's not going to make it. And therefore, based on the Svek Sveka, the Rakeach says, the pregnant wife of a Kohen is permitted to go into a cemetery. So the question is, Bisman Hazeh, nowadays, does the law change? Or, what do you mean? I thought the Torah is eternal. What do you mean, does the law change? Why should it change in the first place? Why would it possibly change? Because today, with modern technology, we have the sonogram. And the sonogram can tell us the sex of the baby. But let's assume for our purposes, it's a reliable test, and we accept it la halacha. So the question is, if one has the ability to find out the sex of the baby, can one still rely on svek sveka, or will one be obligated to spend the money or spend the time and take a sonogram test? So the question basically is, if the doubt can be resolved, is one, the svek sveka still apply? Do I say we can't rely on svek sveka? It's like by rove there's halacha, you have to be mavar, you have to clarify the situation. You can't rely on rove if you could find out the fact. So what about by svek sveka? Can rely on svek sveka and say I don't have to, in this case, take the sonogram? So the Ramah, not talking about this case, the Ramah is talking about by issues of treifa and wings. The Ramah writes that yes, you could still rely on svek sveka, and one is not obligated to mevar the svek sveka. The Shach disagrees and says if there's no expense and it's easy to do, it's best to be strict and to, in this case, then in our case, where you're taking a routine sonogram anyway, it doesn't cost you any more money, you can find out about the sex. So according to the Ramah, you wouldn't have to. According to the Shach, perhaps it's better to. However, comes along the Noda Yehuda and says, even the Shach would agree in this case that one would not have to be mevarer. Why not? Because you only say you have to be mevarer, clarify a svek sveka, double doubt, if you could clarify both aspects of the sveka. So the suffix, whether male, female, that we could clarify. But I guess apparently on a sonogram you can't tell yet whether the baby's going to make it or not. And therefore, the Noda says, since I can't clarify both doubts, I wouldn't be obligated to clarify the svek sveka. So based on the Noda Yehuda, one would not be obligated to take a sonogram to determine the sex of the baby, and one could rely on the rokeach svek sveka. However, not everyone agrees with the svek sveka of the rokeach. The Pri Megadim and others, they quote from Tosis and Ksuvis and Davtes that they don't like the specific svek sveka, because they say for it to be a double doubt, you need what we call a suffix hashakol, which means it has to be close to 50-50 doubt. So male or female, close to 50-50, but whether it's viable or not, I don't know what the percentages are, but I'd say over 90% come out viable, maybe more. So therefore, what kind of svek svek is that? Therefore, the Pri Megadim, based on this Tosis and Ksuvis, the Chasim Sofer redefined what the Rokeach is saying. He says the Rokeach isn't working out svek sveka because it's not a safek hashako. He's saying is, the rokeach is saying it's working midin rov. That 50% chance boy or girl, and there's a small chance that it'll be a neifel. So so there's more than a 50% chance that it will be a female, or that should say it won't be a male, and therefore one can rely on this rov. If there's a major nafkamina between the classical way of learning the rokeach and the way the Chasim Sofer is saying to learn the rokeach is, according to the rokeach, the original, we said it's working with svek sveka, so then we don't have to be mevarer. However, the Chasim Sofer says that it's working midin rov. So if it's working midin rov, so you're not allowed to rely on rov if you could reconcile the doubts. So therefore, that's how the Chasim Sofer learns the rokeach is working midin rov. But it's working midin rov, so then perhaps you would have to pay. You might have to take the sonogram. However, others want to defend the attack on the rokeach, and they claim, Rav Zalman Nechemya Goldberg, among others, that a svek sveka is good, even though it's not a safek hashako. And basically, to discuss is the case in Yevamos, which we're not going into, but he wants to say as a raya from a Mishnah Gemara in Yevamos that you could rely on a svek sveka even if the sveka isn't a safek hashako. So that's what some achronim learn, and therefore we don't have to worry about it. So you have the rokeach svek sveka. A second issue addresses is a concept of tuma belua, tahara belua. That basically, that if something, the Magen Avram, based on the Gemara in Chulin, Ayin Aleph Amid Aleph, if a person has a ring they swallow, and they go into a cemetery and they come out, the ring remains tar because it's surrounded by the womb. So the Magen Avram writes, we said, Tuma Belua, the fetus is protected by the mother, so even if they go into a cemetery, it's not an issue. So the question is, so what is, if this is true, this concept of Tuma Belua, that something which is in case covered up, you don't have to worry, so why do we need the svek svek at all of the rokeach? So the Magen Avram leads it akasha, but the Radvaz writes, you need the svek sveka in a case where, let's say, the mother is very close to giving birth. So therefore, out Kolzman, it's inside, so it's Tuma Belua. But even if it potentially came out, you would be, the child might become Tameh, but you can rely on the Sveka that you don't have to worry about it. And others say that anyway, even with Tuma Belua, Rav Chanan Wasserman, Rav Chaim Ozik Rosinski, Rav Shachter Shita, that even if the fact that you don't become Tameh doesn't mean it's mutter. They hold it's an Isser Kira of Lameis, it'd be prohibited to go even if you don't become Tameh. And the Adin Miluim, he disagrees with the Magen Avram. He says, it's not true. He says, Tuma Belua only works if it's a foreign object. If it's a foreign object, so then you say it's Tuma Belua. But the fetus isn't a foreign object. The Gemara tells us in Yevamos, Ayin Chesam and Beis, that it talks about a Gentile who converts while she's pregnant. So the Gemara has the whole discussion, the status of the blood. The Gemara talks about Uber Yarech Imo. The Uber is considered part of the mom, and when she went to the mikvah, so too is the mikvah on the child. So therefore we see that it's not a chatzitza, the fact that you're inside the tefillah counted. So it only works if it's a foreign object, but therefore there is no concept of Tuma Belua here, and therefore either, we have to rely on the rokeach of svek svek or some other reason. And a third reason to be lenient is, and the Brisker Rav discusses it, at what point of the relation, when does the father-son relationship begin? does it begin at birth or at conception? In other words, in fact, I was in the motor vehicle office last week, and I saw a comic strip. I wanted to know, when does life begin? So you had a minister, you had a liberal, and you had a teenager. So the minister said, well, life begins at conception. We all know abortion is prohibited. The liberal says, no, you can do what you want with your body. Life doesn't begin until after the fetus is born. And the teenager said, when you get your driver's license, that's when life begins. So whenever life begins, when does the father-son relationship begin? So some want to point out, based on the Gemara in Yevamos, Samech Zayin Amid Aleph, that the fetus in the womb of a Kohen is Zaru, or fetus in any womb doesn't get the status of a Kohen or a Levi, and because of Uber Yerach Imo, and therefore, even if there's no Svek Sveka, even if no Tuma Belula, but he doesn't become a Kohen until he's born, so there's no problem for a Kohen to go into a Sebet for a wife of a pregnant Kohen. So based on these three reasons of Svek Sveka, the Rokeach, Tuma Belula of the Magen Avram, whether fetus is a Kohen, there are many poskim Rameko. On the other hand, Rav Hershel Schachter, Rav Bleich, and others, Machmir, based on a different sheet, at least Rav Schachter, is based on Kruv Lameis, that the Isser is coming in close proximity to the dead, not necessarily resultory, and therefore Rav Schachter and others hold that it's usher for a wife of a Kohen to come into a cemetery, so it's a Machlokas HaPoskim. But the bottom line is, the Minhag Yisrael is, whether you're a wife of a Kohen, wife of a Levi, or wife of Yisrael, the Minhag Yisrael is that if a woman is pregnant, she doesn't go into a cemetery anyway, because the cemetery is the Avi Avos Tuma, it's the highest level of Tuma, and a pregnant woman is the highest level of life. She has her life and she has a Vlad's life. So therefore the Minhag Yisrael is not to go in to a cemetery.